For the safety of listeners at home, following guidelines specified by the MPAA for film as a baseline, the following reading will be rated PG for scenes of fantasy violence and some dark imagery. The text read comes from a slightly earlier version of the novel. As such, wording may be different in certain places compared to the final published text. However, the author has endeavored to make sure that the reading and the novel are as close as possible. The Knight and the Unicorn. Chapter 10. Conclusion. Elendria found itself in a festival mood. Music was playing throughout the streets, feasts were held in major halls, and vendors sold wares among the people. The town was decked in brightly colored streamers, and everyone had put on their finest clothing for days and nights out on the town. A unique occurrence had happened recently. A party of men from the town of Heron had passed through the forest bringing gifts. The people of Elendria had scarce heard of the town of Heron, but found the visitors to be quite amicable and good people. They had recently cleared a path through the forests, and the seaside town was no more than a 2 days' journey to the northeast. Already a village was being constructed at a midway point to serve as a resting place for travelers and traders. They paid visits to 3 locations in particular. They went to the mayor's house, and extending an olive branch of friendship and trade, which is what had kicked off the festival celebrations to begin with. Next they went to the church and parsonage of Friar Jacobs for worship and for meeting the potential construction of a church in their own town and a smaller chapel at the Waypoint town. Then they visited a rather nondescript little house just off the main road and spent an evening talking to the inhabitants. Upon leaving, they left them with a large bag of money and immediately went to the church and worshipped again. It was now the final day of the festival, and a marriage was in progress. It was the first such marriage in many years, being almost a part of the festival itself, for how bright and happy the general mood was. It was the first public marriage in many years, too, and it seemed that half the town of Elendria was present. That so many people attended the marriage during the time of festival was no coincidence. The marriage that took place was between Tristan and Rosalind, the young couple who were but 2 years prior almost torn apart by a terrible evil that had befallen Elendria. And yet what many would consider quite against the odds, they had not only overcome that evil, but banished it from the woods. The party of the men from Heron was unique, because it was the first time that the road between the 2 cities was not blocked, without taking a long route and passing through 2 other towns, and Tristan and Rosalind had deemed the timing sufficient to marry on the anniversary of such an event. 2 years had passed since Tristan and Rosalind's successive bouts against the enchantress Serena, and yet the village knew only the vague details. After some time, there was pressure from Tristan and Rosalind's parents as to what exactly happened in the forests, and only they knew all of the details. They told the story to their parents, with some corroborative efforts from a recent but close friend of theirs, and even told the mayor the story. But aside from the enchantress being dead and Tristan and Rosalind having both played integral parts in their defeat, the village itself was unaware. Nor were they aware of the association between the men of Heron and the young couple. In return for the bag of gold, Tristan and Rosalind had found and returned an artifact, a skillfully made horn, belonging to a young guard named Alexander, who had run off into the woods after becoming cursed and committing a terrible crime against his will, and had paid their proper respects to him. At the marriage, the bride had been presented and the sermon had been given. Tristan was dressed in a black coat, well-trimmed pants, and a set of fine leather boots, while Rosalind wore a light gown with faint light blue streaks running through it. The 2 sat up front and center while Friar Jacobs gave a few final words from the altar before the exchanging of vows. Once he was finished, Friar Jacobs descended from the altar and bid the young couple to stand up. He was about to administer the vows when a guard entered and interrupted the ceremony with a loud whistle, and the entire chamber turned to him. "Who dares to interrupt my ceremony?" Friar Jacobs shouted, forgetting his decorum. "Excuse me, Friar," the guard said with a bow. "There's a strange beast outside that would like to give a request to the groom, that he may come inside as a guest." "Who is this beast you speak of?" Tristan called out before Friar Jacobs could respond. "It is a horse-like beast, dark gray with a mane like blue fire and a horn of diamond." Tristan smiled and turned to Rosalind. "Shall we let him in?" Rosalind smiled back and nodded. She turned to the guard. "Let him in, guard. He is late." The guard was momentarily frozen by the strangely playful tone in Rosalind's voice. But Friar Jacobs bid him to open the door of the church to the beast, and so he did. In walked something that was exactly as the guard had described. The beast was a unicorn of noble bearing, with a dark grey coat, and a mane that looked like blue fire, and a horn that may have been constructed of diamond. He walked down the centre aisle of the church with a fine and proud gait, and held his head high as he approached the altar. Around his horn was a band of gold fixed with a blue diamond, and a second plainer band without one. The crowd inside the church gasped. Such a beast had not been seen for many years. The last known recorded event was around the time the Enchantress had first visited Elendria. There was much commotion as to whether or not the unicorn should have been let inside to begin with. Nevertheless, there was a smile on the faces of Tristan and Rosalind, and a vague feeling of recognition by Friar Jacobs. "Who are you?" the friar asked. "My name is Sorin," the unicorn answered, his voice as noble as his bearing. "I am he who aided in their quest, and I am who you see me to be. They wished me to be at their wedding, and I felt I must oblige. I asked nothing more." The entire congregation had settled down to hear the speech of the unicorn, and were to a point surprised by its brevity. But they made no hasty decisions, and instead deferred to the friar and the young couple. Tristan and Rosalind made no objections, but Friar Jacobs had another question for him. "It does not hurt you to be on sacred ground?" "As a point of fact, I am more revitalized by standing here than I was on the ground outside not a moment ago." With this answer, Friar Jacobs was pleased. "You may stay as long as you like." The congregation was bid to stand, and suddenly the unicorn was accepted as one of their own. Friar Jacobs turned to Tristan and asked him to recite his vows as though the intrusion had been but a minor delay. "I, Tristan, take thee, Rosalind, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, through light and dark, through fire and through flood, to love and to cherish, that I may think of no other, till death do us part. I, Rosalind, take thee, Tristan, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, in waking and in sleeping, in faith and in weakness, to love and to cherish, that nothing may stand in our way, till death do us part." Had one of the congregation been paying attention, they might have noticed an amused yet proud grin across the face of the unicorn standing at the front of the church. "Whoever has the ring, bring it forwards." The dark grey unicorn took a few steps toward the altar and bowed his horn towards Friar Jacobs. Friar Jacobs noticed the band of gold with the blue diamond in the other band and gently removed them from the horn, at which Sorin moved back to where he had been standing before. "With these rings," the friar announced to the church, "the vows that have been spoken shall be sealed. The rings, passed from one another, signify the connections of their hearts and minds. I shall bind them to the promises they have spoken to one another. The marriage herein presented, with you all as witnesses, should remain in health and in good faith, and thus will remain blessed by God the Most High." The rings were presented. Tristan took the ring with the diamond and placed it on Rosalind's hand, while Rosalind placed the golden band on Tristan's finger. Once the rings were in place, the friar addressed the church once more. "The rings have been passed, and the marriage has thus been sealed and blessed. May you two live in happiness and in love with one another. As you leave this place, remember the events that brought you together, and how much you have already endured to this point, and look upon them with fondness, for they have strengthened the bonds between you forevermore." And with that he closed his book. "You may now kiss the bride." The bells rang, the organ began to play, and Tristan and Rosalind kissed in front of the entire congregation to the applause of all present. They were escorted out of the church by Sorin, and the town of Elendria welcomed them, blessed them, and congratulated them on the marriage. Tristan and Rosalind had since purchased a home together and moved out of the apartment. Now married, they returned to the home where they lived mostly as normal, though they soon became ambassadors and diplomats of a sort to Heron, and traveled there on occasion. They had 2 sons and a daughter, and remained happily married to the end of their long days. As for Sorin the unicorn, While he never lived in Elindria, he was always welcome there whenever he arrived. No one shied away from him. He was kind and gentle and well-spoken to all, and he helped protect the town and all those who traveled to the forest roads. He lived in the forests, and on clear days, when the sun is shining bright and warm, he could often be seen wandering through the forest, monitoring the pathways and keeping them safe. Or sometimes he would be resting in a meadow under a large oak tree, where the plants never die and the water is sweet, singing a melody of days gone by. Here ends The Knight and the Unicorn.